Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I want to have a little discussion of some of the things that are going on with knife laws, not only in Canada but other places in the world, and just talk a little bit about how frustrating that is and the fact that things that are being done are just absolutely nonsensical. So let me start off by saying the general consensus seems to be that law-abiding citizens are not trustworthy and should not be allowed to possess anything dangerous of any kind, because as soon as they get it, they're going to just start killing people with it. Okay? And so in order to make the world safer, what we have to do is take anything away that could be used as a weapon. And that philosophy seems to predominate not only Canada, but many other places as well. And honestly, that's the only justification I can think of. You know, I'm thinking of the recent CITT ruling in Canada where they redefined what the CBSA, which is the Canadian Border Services Agency, they redefined what that agency could consider a prohibited weapon for import. Okay, now that's very important to point out. They haven't changed the Criminal Code of Canada. Nothing has changed about what is legal to own in Canada. All that's changed is what is legal to import into Canada, which is extremely frustrating. So now you have, you know, essentially legal items that are illegal to import, which is just stupid. Let me go on, because I don't want to get caught up on just this one point. In England, they're having a problem with knife crime. Now, what's interesting is they've already gone crazy banning every kind of gun that you could conceivably imagine. And, you know, the suggestion was sort of, hey, you know, if we take away guns, then people won't hurt each other. Well, on the face of it, that is absolute stupidity. But of course, politicians are known for stupidity. And so they went with that and banned basically every kind of gun, thinking that somehow that would have an impact on crime, which it never does. It's been tried lots of places. It has no impact. People just find different ways of carrying out the violence that they want to carry out. When you have a crime problem, you have to deal with crime. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but in addition to that, we also have in Toronto this year, and I've actually got a story that I think I can share with you here in a second. Of course, my tablet's gone to sleep as I'm trying to record this. But let's bring it back up here. So right here, I have a map of Toronto. You can see Mississauga, Toronto, Brampton, so that should give you an idea of, you know, where we are. Richmond Hill is up here, Pickering's over here. And these symbols on the map as it's scrolling through are gun violence, okay, records of gun violence since June 21st of this year. There have been 21 shootings. And if you extend that out to the whole year, it's actually up quite a bit. And it's even extending into some other cities. And so politicians have looked at this and said, man, we've really got to do something about this gun violence. And here's the problem, is that they betray themselves right away by even calling it gun violence. If they said, we've got to do something about crime and violence, specifically gang-related and drug-related in our city, that would make a lot more sense. But that's not how they phrase it. They know there's more political, you know, hay to be made by talking about gun violence, because that seems to be, especially spurred by, you know, much of the American discussion, what's popular. So here are gun crimes, and it's awful that these crimes are occurring. All right, but let's move now to the solution. Okay, let's go through the thought process that seems to be in place when it comes to this stuff on the part of politicians and lawmakers and those who are concerned about stopping this violence. You know, let's use for 1 second Toronto as our example. And in Toronto, you know, just a short drive north on the 400, you can get to Vaughan, where there's a Bass Pro Shop. You know, in another 20 minutes, you can be in Barrie, where there's a Cabela's, both of which have a pretty hefty stock of firearms on hand that you can purchase if you have a restricted firearms license, which is not that easy to get in Canada, but that's a discussion for a different video. If you go outside of Hamilton to the east, you can fairly quickly get to St. Catharines, where again there's a Bass Pro Shop, and again the potential there for buying firearms. And so the argument, I mean, and so what must be happening, guys, is that, you know, these youths from downtown Toronto and in some cases from downtown Hamilton, although to a much lesser extent, are driving out to Bass Pro in Vaughan or, Cabela's up in Barrie, buying handguns and taking them back down to, buying handguns with their restricted licenses, or maybe somehow these stores are so money hungry that they're just selling guns to these kids without any kind of background check, without any kind of check for ID or anything like that, because that is definitely possible in Canada, right? So these kids are buying these guns, legally purchasing them at regular retail outlets, going back to Toronto and blowing each other away, right? And so if we create stricter gun laws and we make it more difficult to buy a gun legally in Canada, it will definitely have an impact on the gun crime that's going on in Toronto, right? I hope if you're listening to this, you can hear the sarcasm in my voice, because I'm laying it on pretty strong. That is the dumbest thing that anyone has ever thought of. Okay? Why on earth would making changes to legal firearm ownership have any impact whatsoever on illegal firearm use and ownership? It doesn't. It can't. Okay? And there are all kinds of examples that we could give. A place like Chicago, where they have extremely strict firearm laws, they have more gun deaths, per day than we have in our whole country of Canada in a year. Okay, so the only thing that we can figure out is the assumption behind that has to be that citizens are not trustworthy, and we don't want them to have anything dangerous ever. The same kind of logic applies in the UK. They have these bins. Turn in your knives. Okay, you can drop them in the bin, and somehow they think that if we fill this bin up with knives, we're going to save lives. Okay. And nothing could be further from the truth. Why on earth would anyone who's seriously contemplating using a knife in an act of violence say, I can sort of imagine they're on their way over to, wherever they're on their way to sort of their intended target, and on the way they pass one of these bins where you can put your knife in, and they go, oh man, I was going to go kill this guy, but there's a knife bin. I'll just drop my knife in that bin, and I won't engage in this, act of violence that I was about to undertake. Of course, that's not going to happen. And thinking that it would happen is completely ludicrous. Now, I know I'm kind of straw-manning the argument here, but it is almost that ridiculous, right? I'm kind of parodying it a little bit. And so, the thought that if we start taking stuff away, that somehow everything is going to be fine, and if this kid wasn't holding a gun, or this teenager or young person, we're talking about 15 to 25, right? We all know who we're talking about. We're talking about 15 to 25-year-old gang members, perhaps a little older than that. But, the thought that if we took away their guns and knives, they'd be like at the park playing hopscotch and riding the teeter-totter, or maybe, at home playing Minecraft on their, Xbox 360, is completely ludicrous. Right? The access to one particular weapon makes no difference whatsoever. And in fact, in England, it's even worse than this, because there are a number of stories. I recently was reading where the London police have said, well, we're doing this because there are a lot of law-abiding good kids that don't have any criminal record, that don't have involvement in any kind of gang or criminal activity, and they're carrying knives as well. They feel the need to carry a knife. And my thought is, if you've got regular law-abiding kids feeling the need to carry a knife because they may have to defend themselves, that is a failure of politicians and law enforcement to provide safe streets, okay? That is not a failure of that individual child who is in a situation where they feel the need to carry something for self-defense, okay? And to suggest that is absolutely insane, and trying to cast blame on, the 12-year-old who's walking to school and afraid that they may not make it, and say it's their fault that that's the situation, is completely irresponsible, when the fingers should clearly be pointed at politicians and, to a lesser extent, police. Honestly, the police are just going to carry out the will of the politicians, generally speaking. So if if the police are failing, it's not really a police failing, it's a political failing. Now, if you were to try to carry out this logic, you would have to say that, all we have to do is take away access to guns and knives and bricks and chairs and sticks and shovels and hammers and cars and, a million other things that you could think of. And if you took all that stuff away, then we would be safer. The reality, though, is not, because that is just not, that's just not true. Okay, if you took all that stuff away, criminals would just find another way to be criminals. What you have is a problem with gangs, a problem with drugs, and a problem with crime. And if you deal with those things, the other side of the equation will go away. All right, even in the US, I'm going to comment on the US just a little bit, and I've done this myself, and you can really, really easily do it. If you Google, how many gun crimes take place in the US, and then if you look up how many of those gun crimes are gang related, it's stupidly high, like 90%. So literally, if you take the gangbangers shooting each other out of the equation, you really don't have a problem with guns in the US. Okay? And so if you want to solve your gun problem, it has nothing to do with legislation and has everything to do with dealing with crime. And by the way, the sad fact is the most reliable predictor of crime, they seem to be two factors, and that is population density and poverty. You put those two things together, you're going to get crime. And so, start finding a way to deal with those problems, and you could actually have a potential to make a difference instead of the nonsense that currently goes on. All right. Finally, okay, one last thing to say here, and that is New York City used to be extremely dangerous, and now it is much safer. Now, I'm not saying that New York City is like the safest city in the world, and you should, put your, take a bag of gold and put it in the middle of a table and leave it outside and no one's going to touch it, right? That's not what I'm suggesting for a second. However, it is much safer largely because of the policies of stop and frisk and carding that they use to reduce crime. And of course, as soon as you bring those things up, everyone starts screaming racism, which is insane. So they'll say, well, look at the statistics. It's primarily people of a certain race who are stopped. Okay, and we know in certain cities it's going to be, whatever, probably young black males. Okay. By the way, if you went to a different city, if you went to LA, it would be a different breakdown. It would largely be, young Hispanic males. If you went to, Russia or the Ukraine, it would primarily be young white males that are involved in organized crime. Okay, if you went to the west coast of Canada, it would be young Asian males, right? The reality is when there's a neighborhood that's a problem neighborhood where it tends to be more dangerous, of course the police ought to focus their efforts in that neighborhood. And of course the demographics of that neighborhood are going to be reflected in whoever gets stopped. Okay, that's not racism, that's just reality. Okay, if you have a primarily white neighborhood that has a lot of crime and you start stopping and frisking people, and if you start, increasing police presence, well, guess what? You're going to end up stopping and frisking and questioning more white people than any other race. But the same holds true for any neighborhood you go to, and the police resources ought to be deployed where the problem is the worst. And if the problem is the worst in a black neighborhood or a Hispanic neighborhood or an Asian neighborhood or a Jewish neighborhood or an Islamic or an Arab country type of neighborhood, it doesn't make any difference, okay? The police still need to be deployed in the neighborhood where the problem is the worst. And the identity politics and the equality of outcome nonsense that's going on right now with sort of political correctness is actually making it more dangerous. They're actually discouraging police from policing in those more dangerous neighborhoods, allowing more crime to go on and more of those, more people of whatever ethnic background happen to be in that neighborhood to end up dead or involved in crime. Okay, so the policy of political correctness is causing the problem to be worse. Now, let's come back to, the end of the story here. And actually, let me say two other quick things. One thing I do think the US has gotten very right, and it's important that other countries get it right as well, even though many do not, is in the US, your right to bear arms is protected by law. Okay, and that is something that really needs to happen everywhere around the world. In Canada, it is illegal to have a weapon to protect yourself. Okay, I could be carrying this flashlight, and if a police officer stopped me and said, "Why do you have that flashlight?" and I'd say, "Hey, in case I need a light," he'd go, "Okay, that's fine." Or if I said, "Hey, I'm going to go worm hunting tonight," "Hey, that's fine." But if I said, I'm carrying this light as a force multiplier in case I ever have to defend myself, guess what? This is going to be confiscated and I may actually get arrested. Right? And the same is true of anything you're carrying in Canada, from, a knife or a gun, even a sharpened pencil. Right? By the way, it's not always illegal. It's not illegal, in fact, to carry a gun, a non-restricted firearm in Canada. People who are hunting do it all the time. And in fact, I've talked to lots of police officers who will say, yeah, during hunting season, we stop people all the time who have, a shotgun laying on the back seat. Of course, if you're traveling with a gun, it has to be unloaded and the ammo and the gun, have to kind of be separated. But that's a pretty common experience, especially, hunters just changing fields, throw the gun in the back seat, drive to the next location or their other deer stand or whatever. That's legal to do in Canada. It's not a big problem, and the police know that. And in fact, as I said, I've had lots of police tell me, "Oh yeah, I've stopped lots of people that have a firearm in the car. It's no big deal." It's only if you have that firearm and you say, "Yeah, this is for self-defense," now it's a huge deal. And here's the other last point that I want to make. I know I'm getting a little long-winded, but there have been a couple of cases in Canada where I can think of three right off the top of my head. One in now I'm going to forget the name of the city, just outside of Hamilton, Ontario. Anyway, doesn't matter. But just outside of Hamilton, Ontario, a man was defending his property, defending his life from someone who was stealing his car. Thought the guy had a gun and shot him. Turns out he didn't have a gun. The guy who did the shooting was acquitted, and he should have been. Okay, but sadly, it shouldn't have taken so long. The very fact that that other individual was on his property stealing his car should have justified the shooting immediately, without any other circumstances. The same thing happened out west with a young person by the name of Colton Bushy. It's too bad that he was shot, and we shouldn't be, it's sad that anyone has to lose their life. However, the kid was assaulting a farmer on his property, trying to steal from him and putting his life at risk, and was shot, engaging in criminal behavior and in threatening behavior. All right. So guess what? You threaten someone and that individual has a gun. Well, you threatened the wrong person, and frankly, you deserve to be shot. That's what happens when you engage in criminal activity. That's one of the reasons you shouldn't do it, among, many others. And then there was another case where an individual's house was actually being firebombed. They were throwing Molotov cocktails at his house. This was near St. Catharines, Ontario. And in that case, the person didn't shoot at the attackers, didn't shoot at the perpetrators. He fired into the air with a legally owned, legally stored handgun that he unlocked from his safe, loaded, and took outside and fired to protect his life. Okay. And so in all of those cases, what happens is the person is initially arrested and charged in a clearly justified use of force. And that's the problem with Canadian law, the way it's handled. We don't have a right to protect ourselves with a weapon at all. And if you do protect yourself with a weapon, you are almost certainly going to be arrested and tried, and hopefully you'll be acquitted. In those cases, the individuals were acquitted, and they should have been. But the fact is, they should have been praised as heroes. They should have been lauded for defending themselves and their families in an appropriate manner. And instead, they're right away treated like criminals because they had the audacity to use a firearm. Okay, and that's pretty, that's kind of revealing a pretty sad bias about firearms in Canada. Okay, so that's where I want to finish this off. It's really sad that the government of our country and many other countries don't trust their citizens, don't want their citizens to have the ability to defend themselves, even though the government is largely ineffective at doing that. They want us to lay down and die rather than stand up and defend ourselves. And that is incredibly frustrating. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for listening to me vent. I'd love to hear your comments about this down below. I've talked about a lot of different things, and I really would like to have you guys weigh in, share stories, share experiences, share some of the insane things that you have found in your own life and some of the insane stories you've heard. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.